What is up, guys? 70 Savage here. If you are new to the channel, we have been converting this Sprinter van right here into a full-on tiny home. So the lowdown on the floor, if you have not watched the previous two videos, we did the first attempt, it didn't work. We made a second video about ripping the whole floor up and doing it over again, and the result of that video was a solution that I did not like. So in this video, we finally come up with the perfect solution for the van floor. So for those of you guys who are results oriented and only care about the changes between the first video and now and what I did differently, there are 5 different things that I changed, 2 small ones and 3 big ones. The first small one, those bolts that are concealed underneath the lonseal floor that you're never gonna see, I did countersinks instead of those little 2-inch wood biscuits. The second small change that I did was in the lonseal vinyl itself. I drilled 1/2-inch holes in all of the exposed bolt hole locations. Pretty much just an aesthetic change. And then there were 3 big changes that I made. The first one is that the insulation underneath the floor, I was previously using Thinsulate, and now I am using closed cell foam. It is 1/4 inch thick. I still think the Thinsulate's a really good option. They're both good. I'll talk a little bit more about that when I get to it. Change number 4 was another big change. It was to address the seams that you could see between the subfloor boards. What I did was I made, instead of 4 pieces of plywood that I laid down, I joined each 2 to make 2 big pieces of plywood. I did that with a 1/2 lap joint. Change number 5, this was a biggie. The way that I adhered the lonseal floor to the wood subfloor was with epoxy. Big boy, lonseal, epoxy, we went for it. A lot more details to come. So I definitely still recommend watching this video all the way through. There's a ton of good learnings in this that you could probably learn from so that you don't make the same very expensive mistakes that I made. But I just wanted to get the overall changes out of the way for you guys that only care about that. Let's go ahead and get started. First things first, we got 4 new sheets of Baltic birch plywood here. They are currently 8 feet long. We're gonna cut them down to 6 feet long.
It's all the same, some things never change. I couldn't stop and say enough. It's all the same, but you only take the blame, even when you are blowing up.
All right, so we've got our 4 boards cut down to size, and it is now time to router out the 1/2 lap joint. So the plan is to turn these 4 small-ish boards into 2 big boards. The way that we're gonna join each of those together is with this joint right here. This is called a 1/2 lap joint. And basically the 2 boards mate like this. We're gonna put some epoxy in the middle and keep them perfectly flush to have 1 extra long panel. So there's a couple of really important aspects of creating a good 1/2 lap joint. The first one is you want to make sure that the mating surfaces are super smooth. So you got to make sure that your router is completely level the entire time that you're routering it out. Obviously the depth of these needs to be exactly half the thickness of whatever you're 1/2 lap joining together. And the way that we are making sure all of those things are true as with this little router jig / mount that I made here. This is gonna prevent the router from tipping side to side like this or front to back like this, as it normally does if you just use the included router base. This is gonna force it to stay exactly level with the wood that we're routering out. We have to 1/2 lap joint the entire length of these boards behind us. Wish me luck.
First one came out pretty dang good. We did make 1 small mistake right there. But overall, it is nice and smooth, all at the same depth and very straight. 3 more to go.
All right, guys, so a quick test fit. You can see the big square boards. Those are what are eventually gonna go in the van. Now, I haven't glued it yet, but the 1/2 lap joint itself came out perfect. I literally could not have asked for a better 1/2 lap joint. It is perfectly flat on the top here, especially when I press down. You can tell that once this thing's all glued up, it's gonna sit completely flush. There's about 3/4 inch overlap between the two boards, which I think is plenty considering the strength of the epoxy that we're going to use. It is now time to do the glue up. For the glue up, I am using this West System epoxy. From what I've read, pretty much the best stuff you can get, and we're gonna paintbrush it in between the seams. Oh, and by the way, I'm just using regular wax paper throughout the seams so that any extra epoxy does not stick to it. All right, guys, the panels are now 100% glued up. You can tell that I found everything in my sight that was possibly heavy and used it as a pseudo clamp. All we can do is wait. Let's see how it goes. By the way, just cutting these joints, making the jig for the router, and doing this glue up, full day of work. Sometimes it's hard to get that perspective while you're watching the video, but just wanted to throw it out there. Good morning, guys. Let's go ahead and see how they turned out. Dang, guys, so stoked. These things came out fantastic. Despite not having clamps, they stayed together pretty well and they are perfectly flush. The whole boards are very level all the way across, which is important. So the reason I didn't just glue the middle seam there and have one gigantic floorboard is because of weight. It would be virtually impossible to lift this thing around considering I only have 2 people, myself, and sometimes my dad will help me if I convince him with some beer. But he's kind of got a bunk knee right now. He just got a knee replacement. He can't lift very much. You would definitely need 3 people, maybe even 4 if you wanted to lift a 1/2-inch panel that was 15 feet long by 6 feet wide. The panels behave as if they're one panel. Like I would expect a single piece of wood being wiggled here to do this, which is pretty inspiring. It feels like they're joined very securely. It also appears I haven't done any of my laundry since Floor version 1. I am very glad that we saved these large, time-consuming templates. You never know when you're gonna have to redo the same project 3 times a couple months later. So now we've laid out the original floor template that we made. This is that plastic cardboard material. You can watch how I made this in the first version, or the first attempt of this floor video. Since we have the big heavy batteries on this side of the wheel well and the big heavy water tank on that side of the wheel well, I think that will do the most natural balancing of the seams here. So this one should be hardly visible. And the rest of the seams are glued together, so that should leave us with as little seamage as possible. I'm going seam crazy here. I've had straight nightmares about these things. Now we just gotta take our handy dandy pencil and trace this bad boy out. All right, let's get these bad boys cut. To smooth out this epoxy, I'm using this little tiny hand plane, just back and forth. All right, guys, so yesterday we absolutely slayed out. We spent 10 hours straight cutting the boards, getting the holes drilled out. I literally forgot to eat lunch yesterday. That's how locked in we were. In terms of the shape of the floor, I covered that primarily in the first attempt at this floor video. This one is exactly the same. We cut the edges to match the template. We routed out some of the high points in the van, specifically around the wheel wells and on the front lip that's going to cover the factory floor. We just finished primering both of these panels. We put 2 coats on each side. We used the exact same primer that we did last time. It's the Kills Premium. So we are using the exact same 1/2-inch 3M thin slate insulation that we're gonna put on the bottom of the subfloor boards. So this worked really well last time. It's kind of 3 purposes why I use this insulation. 1, it compresses down so it keeps the floor very low profile and still has a thermal break in the high points, and obviously in the low points it does have some insulation value to it. It also has sound insulation value. Last of all, it is lightweight and waterproof. I would have preferred not to buy 3 sheets of this as it's pretty expensive, but that's where we're at. And right now we have the insulation ready to cut, but I have nobody to help me move the panels. So while we're waiting, got a little preview for you guys here. Got ourselves the dual bike rack back here, and I'm intentionally giving you guys a bad angle. There's some other really cool stuff on here. There will be a full video coming soon. Subscribe if you want to see the zombie apocalypse makeover of this van. All right, guys, we are good to go. And I'm gonna say this with slight hesitation, but hopefully right now is the final time we ever have to lift these boards and put them into the van. Hell yeah, boys. We got the floor in. We basically have 2 panels And each panel is completely separate. So the panels themselves are bolted to the frame with the factory bolt holes, but the panels don't touch anything else. They don't touch the walls, they don't touch each other. So having the floating panels with just a thin layer of insulation underneath them is a perfect way to allow for the natural movement of the van, especially when you're in kind of off-road conditions with the van twisting and turning pretty heavily. The floorboards are not gonna squeak. This is designed in a very similar way to the exterior panels on a car. Let's say this panel right here behind the headlight. It's obviously not touching anything at all, except for where it's actually bolted to the van itself. So stoked about this, guys. Oh my God. It has been a lot of work getting here. Hopefully this is the last time we put this floor down. All right, so there are two things that we are going to do before we put the vinyl on top of the subfloor. The first thing is we have to put some Loctite on these countersink bolts, as well as silicone over the top so that they are perfectly 100% flush with the surface. The reason that these ones are countersinks and the rest of them are regular bolts is that these countersinks are going to be concealed underneath the floor. You're never going to see them. Whereas the rest of the bolts I'm going to use as mounting points for the cabinet. The second thing that we need to do is we're going to fill this gap right here with silicone. Now this gap was intentional. It is 5/16 of an inch all the way across, which is enough space to account for the contraction of the boards and the expansion of the boards under weather conditions. However, I do want to seal it with some soft silicone just so that there's as flush as possible of a transition between these two boards. Now, I mentioned this before, but I wouldn't want you guys forgetting it. Always put protection on your caulk. It's very important. All right, guys, sheet of lonseal is laid down. As you can see, it's pretty dark outside. It was important to get this down and let it sit while I sleep tonight so that it kind of relaxes and conforms to the floor, giving us a much easier glue up in the morning. Later, Gators. All right, guys, back out here the next day. Pretty stoked because this new sheet of lonseal that I cut actually fits perfectly. RIP to my bank account having to purchase 2 sheets of this stuff. So we're about to glue this down, and it brings us to another one of the big changes that we're making from the original floor installation. On the original floor, we used tape along all of the edges. It was specialized vinyl floor edge tape to glue the floor down effectively. It was a little bit problematic. That tape, ridiculously strong, it definitely held the floor in place. But with the nature of sheet vinyl, anytime you have like a particular hot spot or cold spot in the van, it's more noticeable with hot spots. You can see like that sun that's shining in the middle of the van there. That portion of the lonseal is getting hot right now, causing it to expand. And when only the edges were taped, the hot parts would bubble up and you would see a visible bubble in the lonseal. So we are going to glue the entire sheet of lonseal down this time and not use that edge tape. We're going to use 3M90, which is what I used on the last van's floor. At the time, I was like kind of questionable. I honestly took a guess at the 3M90 at that time, and it happened to be, you know, now what I think is probably the best solution. The best solution other than epoxying the whole floor down, which is an option, but I don't want to do it. Basically, you spray this stuff on both sides, on the vinyl and on the floor. You wait about a minute for it not to be sticky or not to be wet anymore. You put them down, you move to the next section. Okay, so I know we just finished that time lapse, but after the time lapse, I took a look and that exact same spot was bubbling up. Now I understand why. It's because we have that strip of silicone that we put down, which I knew as we were putting it down was the wrong decision. Basically, the glue is not sticking to the silicone and it's allowing the floor to warp. Challenge is, this time around, this contact cement is dried pretty thoroughly and it's ridiculously hard to get up, so I'm gonna keep prying at it and we're gonna remove that silicone caulk and we're gonna put the floor down for the final time. So we are left with a half ripped up floor. The first half looks good. Second half we gotta come back to, but it is Thanksgiving today. So I'm gonna go have a great meal with the family. Got some nectar of the gods here. And my only goal is not to take my frustration out on them. We're back on the floor project. No more fun and games. Back to majority disappointment with this floor project, but we're making good progress. The front of the floor still looks awesome. The back of the floor is what we're gonna redo. Obviously, you can see we pulled it up and you can see exactly where it wasn't sticking, where that silicone strip is that we need to remove before we reapply the floor. You can see exactly where the silicone is still on the floor because none of the glue sticks to it. So let's start cleaning this up. We're gonna use this Goo Gone caulk remover to get that silicone up off the floor. All right, so that was much messier than I was anticipating, but we got this all cleaned off. All the silicone is removed, and you can see that stripper was actually pretty aggressive. It took off some of the primer, so I got a little bit more primer here. We're gonna put one more coat, make sure it's nice and even. All right, all dry. Let's try gluing her down again. All right, guys, so this is turning into a little bit of a nightmare project at this point. We put the vinyl down, the entire sheet. It was looking pretty good while we were doing so, but after re-examining it when I was done, there's a little bit of a problem. Man, you might not even be able to see this on camera. See the little ribs or the little bumps on the back portion of the subfloor that you don't see on the front portion of the subfloor? They're really hard to see, but they're definitely there, and in the right light, they look awful. And you know what that means. If something looks awful in here, we're gonna redo it. So at this point, the floorboards themselves are pretty much perfect. They are the best solution that I've come up with thus far. The challenge is that we pulled up the vinyl to compensate for that silicone section that it wasn't sticking to the first time we put it down, and pulling it up wrecked the vinyl enough to see some of those bumps through the floor after we laid it down for the second time. So what that means is I have to buy another sheet of lonseal. Gonna take this moment to say, subscribe to the channel to support my lonseal addiction. Long story short, we are ripping up the vinyl. We're going to remove all the adhesive that we put down that 3M90 so we have a nice flat surface, and we are hopefully going to put one more sheet of vinyl down on this floor and have the absolute perfect floor installation. Guys, it's super easy to just fall into the abyss emotionally with these kinds of challenges where you wreck something or have to do something over and over and over again. This is 2 months now that I've been working on this floor. This is the most challenging van project that I've done thus far. It's easy to get down on yourself, but stay positive. A lot of this is a learning experience. If you're building a van, you're gonna end up with a really, really cool camper van that you can live in potentially. But a lot of the value comes from learning. And if you're not making mistakes at the end of the day, you're not really learning anything. So it's important to push yourself. Sometimes it's gonna be expensive. You just gotta suck it up and persevere. So the good news is this 3M90 is ridiculously strong. It's quite a bit of effort to get this floor off. Not impossible, but closest thing to impossible. All right, so that was tiring and depressing. But we got the floor off. The floor looks pretty bad right now. I mean, you can see the spots where we have a lot of glue. Actually ripped up layers of plywood. So I'm gonna have to fill those with wood filler. We basically just sprayed some Goo Gone on top of this adhesive, and we are just scraping it off. It's working pretty well. Not taking off the primer, and it's taking off the 3M90 pretty dang well. So as you can see, this is a pretty messy job, but we're making progress. Gonna get these boards nice and clean, perfectly flat again, so that we have the best installation of the lonseal. All right, guys, so we have yet another problem. Basically, the Goo Gone was strong enough to kind of ruin the integrity of the primer. So when I started sanding it, it started looking like this, where it's all just kind of coming up and turning soft. So I've decided what I need to do is actually remove the primer on this top surface. I'm hoping that I can protect the underside here so that we don't have to do the same thing on the back. I'm gonna spray this up down with mineral spirits, let it sit, and just strip this of primer completely. All of this due to one strip of silicone that ruined the initial application of our floor. Oh man. All right, we got the boards all stripped down yesterday. It took all day long, but now we're gonna put another coat of primer on them. It should be good to go. I think I saved the insulation, kept it all clean throughout that process, so hopefully we only have to redo this side of the boards and we can put them back in. So, what do you know? Another surprise. I can scrape this paint off with my fingernail. This entire coat of paint that we just did, or primer. I think it's because I used mineral spirits on here, and although I let it dry overnight, I think since I soaked it pretty good, the mineral spirits have not evaporated completely, and the primer won't bond to the surface. It's the same primer I've used the last 10 times. Exact same, everything except for that mineral spirit, so I think that's the problem. I honestly have no idea what to do at this point, so I'm gonna think on it. Hopefully an idea comes in my brain, or maybe a bullet. Who knows? That was a joke. So I've been doing some thinking. These have been drying for about a week now, and I think we have a potential solution. We basically hand scraped off most of the primer here. Now what I'm gonna do is use this electric planer. You can see I used it right here. And it actually did a really good job of just taking the most microscopic layer off. All right, guys, that actually came out looking fantastic, even better than the original wood itself, which I guess is the actual intent of a planer. Now we just gotta sand down some of the inconsistencies. We should be good to go. So I was just thinking, you guys are probably wondering why I didn't just sand off all of the primer and why I ended up hand scraping and then planing it. Because you can't sand this stuff. The primer, when you try and sand it, it all just gums up and it actually doesn't even really come off. You really do have to scrape it with a hand scraper, and then apparently you have to plane it. We're sanding it now though, and the sanding is looking great. I have some very good news. We just did a couple of test spots of paint, and look at that. I can't scratch it off with my fingernail. Super stoked about that. The paint is finally adhering again. So we're back here a few days later now, and we're making another pretty big change to the floor. Instead of using 3M thin slate underneath the floor, which I had used previously, it's that 1/2 inch thick 3M thin slate. If you've watched any of the multiple failures before this, you're probably familiar with why I was using that. This time, it was supposed to come in today, and I have an appointment tomorrow to finish this floor. Not all this is gonna make sense yet, because it'll make more sense when I show up tomorrow morning and we finish the floor. But anyway, the same guy that I'm working with uses this stuff underneath his floors instead of 3M thin slate. This is closed cell insulation, 1/4 inch thick. And I looked into it a little bit more, thought about it. This was actually one of the alternatives that I was considering originally, was using closed cell foam underneath the floor instead of thin slate. And he had some in stock. I pretty much decided last minute here to switch to closed cell. Very similar properties. It's completely hydrophobic. It repels water. It does not mold over time. Easy to glue. I just tested it with the 3M90. It doesn't get melted or anything like that. It's pretty good thermal insulation, pretty good sound deadening insulation, and it creates that same layer of padding. So it serves all of the same functional purposes. It's just a little bit of a different material. All right, we got the closed cell foam applied to all the boards. It's a little bit challenging to get it over the humps and bumps, etc. But it worked out. We got it flush enough to where it's not gonna cause any problems. In fact, it's gonna do the opposite of cause problems. It's gonna make us nice and toasty as can be with just a 1/4 inch of insulation. 1/4 inch of insulation. Wish I had that back walking back and forth from school uphill both ways in the snow back in '62. At least that's what my parents tell me about every day. Alrighty guys, we got the floorboards laid in. All of the bolt holes still line up. Our insulation is underneath, and we are ready for the final step. Fingers crossed. Please God, don't make me rip up these floorboards again. Tomorrow morning, I'm gonna put some silicone in there and the countersink bolts down. These are gonna be the ones that are hidden underneath the floor. I'm putting these measurements on the screen now. These are pretty much for myself when I come back to this video in the future. If I do ever need to rip this floor up, just locations where these bolt holes are. For you guys, these don't really matter. All right guys, so we got a little surprise this morning. We drove downtown to Jeremy's shop here. He has we call this the lab, right?
Yeah, this is the lab.
He's got 5 vans in progress right now, and he actually reached out to me on YouTube about this floor. He saw all the problems that I was having with it. The fact that he is a local Healdsburg van shop made me super stoked, and we're working together to get this floor glued down for hopefully the final time.
So basically we're going to get everything lined up, make sure it's exactly how we want it, and then we'll roll it back and set the rolled up material back here. And we'll use that to align. Then I'll jump on the inside and start laying epoxy down, and we'll just roll it like maybe 2 to 3 feet at a time. We'll just roll all the bubbles out and just keep working our way from one end to the other. It's really not that hard. It's just, yeah, it's a little intimidating to work with.
Yeah.
To work with epoxy, and you're supposed to wear your crappy clothes today.
So if you guys didn't catch it, we are using epoxy this time instead of edge tape or 3M90 spray glue. This is kind of the official way to put this lonseal down. This is what they recommend that you use if you email lonseal directly. The challenge is I have kind of an irrational fear of epoxy. There's like very little margin of error for this stuff, and I haven't had the confidence to kind of do it on my own. So that's where these guys come into play. The edge tape was definitely not the play. As I showed you guys before, it bubbles up wherever it's not taped. The 3M90, if you're by yourself and you also have an irrational fear of epoxy, it sticks. And it actually sticks pretty good. You saw how hard it was for me to rip up the floor last time when I messed it up, but it's not even close to the same strength as epoxy. Epoxy, you're never gonna get this floor up. It's one and done. All right, so first thing we had to do, it's about 55 degrees outside today. I had to drive the van around to get the floor heated up. We want it between 65 and 85. We're at 68. Mixing the old gunk. That's what the bit looks like we're using to mix her up. We use the lonseal 650. We got our first laydown of epoxy here. We got Wes on the trowel, the epoxy expert.
Oh yeah, college for this.
Just looking at this stuff scares me. I don't know why. Look at that consistency. So apparently you only have about 30 minutes for each one of these buckets of epoxy that you mix. I also rented this big boy 90-pound roller that we're gonna use once the floor is set to make sure it's nice and flat. According to what Jeremy just said, although you have to pour it and spread it within 30 minutes, you have about an hour to actually get it fully rolled and get some of the biggest bubbles out.
It's important to get the epoxy pretty much right up to the edge, just because that's the part that's going to want to peel away first. And so if you get the edge down tight, then it really makes the floor feel like it's gonna stick and not try to peel up on you in any way.
So I know it looks like they're doing all the work, but in reality, you know, it's all me. We just finished the floor. It is looking awesome. We got the permanent installation thanks to Jeremy and Wes. These guys are amazing. Jeremy is the owner of vanlandstore.com. They sell tons of van related products. And if you happen to be located anywhere near Healdsburg, California in the North Bay area, if you buy something from them, they can also install it for you. Not only does this guy know what he's doing, he's a professional van converter, but he's also just really easy to work with. Highly recommend working with Jeremy. We are out here, it is pouring rain outside and it is dark. It's about 8 o'clock right now. We've been rolling on and off for the past few hours. The epoxy is not completely dry yet, and I wanna get as many bubbles out as we can before it dries fully. We have our space heater pumping. It is set to 78 degrees. And for this one night and this one night only, we are leaving the van running to keep the interior temperature in here exactly what lonseal recommends, which is between 65 degrees and 85 degrees. Feeling much happier than I was a couple weeks ago over Thanksgiving break. It is now the morning. A little sneak peek at the floor. It looks pretty good. I'm gonna let this settle for an entire additional 24 hours before I even think about walking on it, and we'll see how it looks. Something that's kind of interesting I talked to Jeremy about is this epoxy doesn't dry like epoxy glue that dries really, really hard and really, really permanent. This stuff, if you want to, you can kind of poke it with your fingernail, and I can actually scrape it off with my fingernail if I really try here. I couldn't find any other information on the internet about that. Thought it might be useful for you guys. It gives a very, very slight amount of cushion under the floor. It definitely keeps the floor down very, very securely. I mean, you're never gonna get this floor up. The original aluminum angles that we made for the floor trim in Floor Video version 1 still fit perfectly. So I'm just gonna drill some pilot holes and we're gonna attach these guys. The edging came out great. It looks just as good as it did the first time around. It is now time for the final finishing touch of the floor. We are gonna seal the entire edge with silicone. You can see the remnants of it last time, but we're basically putting a little bit of silicone throughout the entire gap around the whole floor. And that just makes it 100% watertight and also dust tight. So any sawdust or water that I spill or anything that happens as I'm building and living in this van is really, really easy to clean up. It doesn't fall down the side and hang around in there. I can just wipe it off or vacuum it up. One tip for applying this silicone, you want to give like about 1 millimeter of tape in between the vinyl. You want a smooth 90-degree bead of silicone in here so it doesn't interfere with your cabinets that you're trying to mount right on the edges. It all has to do with how good your taping is. If your taping is good, you can literally just drag this tool right here all the way across, peel the tape off, and it's gonna look perfect. We just finished caulking around the entire floor. We now have ourselves a van-sized bathtub. We'll be testing that out if my water tank ever explodes. Believe it or not, guys, that is the very final step for this van floor. The entire floor is finally complete. I cannot believe I'm saying this. There were definitely points that I thought we'd be working on this floor for the rest of our lives. Overall, guys, we solved all of our problems. This van floor is still low profile, providing the maximum total headspace. It is lightweight, or as lightweight as it could be. It's slightly insulated. It doesn't squeak at all. It has a nice foam barrier underneath, preventing any squeakage. And most importantly, it looks fantastic. I hope that you guys learned something from this process, because I know that I definitely did. If you are interested in seeing the rest of this van conversion unfold, hopefully a little bit smoother, slap that subscribe button below. If you like this video, it took a lot of effort to put this video together. Slap that like button below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time.